Okay, in terms of the stuff, as always, just bad news. Deadlines, same as they've been all along. Exam 3, Exam 4, quizzes part 4. Deadline 5 on April 24th. An end of day, so 11:59 p.m. Exam number 5, deadline 5 is April 30th at noon. Exam 3 covers our good dead friends, Locke and Barclay. Exam 4 covers our good dead friends, David Hume and Immanuel Kant, who we'll start talking about today. Exam number 5, which deadline is April 30th at noon, covers all the stuff. For the paper, draft deadline is April 9th, so this Thursday if you want to do a draft. Be sure it gets to me by then. I'll comment on it, get it back to you. Deadline for the +5 bonus is April 14th. Deadline for full credit, April 21st. Deadline for half credit, April 24th. In terms of the grade breakdown and stuff, for the quizzes, the best 10 out of all the quizzes, regardless of type, count. They're 30%. For the exams, best 4 out of 5, and they're 40%. And for the paper, best 1 out of 1, and it's 30%. And so to see like how you're doing in the class, like for real, fire up a web browser, go to the Blackboard site, look at your overall grade, and it'll tell you what your real-time grade is. And that's if you decide to not do any stuff and just said, no more stuff. I'm done with the stuff. That's what you get. And the important thing for that is so you can see if you need the final or not. Since the best 4 out of 5 exams count, if you didn't do the final, your overall grade would be whatever you got without the final. And again, it already treats anything you haven't done as a 0, so you couldn't do worse in the final than a 0. So your overall grade quite literally shows at that exact moment in time your absolute worst possible grade, which may not be that bad at all. So to judge whether you need the final or not, look at your overall grade and then see if the final could help you. Before pressing on to the new stuff, which is our adventures in part 4, anything about any previous stuff that needs more stuff?
You say it's going to treat it as a 0, so when you say the best 4 out of 5, you're not going to drop the 0? Or?
Oh, no. Yeah, good question, because since there are 5 exams, right now, any exam you have taken is treated as a 0, but Blackboard is already, it's keeping the best 4. So once you've taken 4 exams, if you haven't got the final, we'll keep those best 4 and drop off the 0. That's all done automatic. I don't have to go in and do any messing around with it. It automatically treats everything you've done as a 0, automatically keeps your best 4 exams, your best 10 quizzes, and the paper. It does all the calculations for me. Okay. Anything else?
Does everyone have to turn in a draft on April 9th?
No. There's no penalty for not doing the draft. It's just, so if you didn't do the draft, whatever final version you put in, turn in would be your one shot at the grade. Yeah, so there's no special grade category for the draft. It's just if you want to do one, sure I get it by then, because that would give me enough time to get it back to you so you could rewrite it if you want to for the +5 deadline. But if you don't do a draft, what would happen is you just write the paper, hopefully, and turn it in. Whatever the grade it is, it is. There's no draft penalty, there's no draft reward.
So the last date for you to accept the draft will be April 9th? No date after that?
Yeah, for the actual draft. Is that's the Thursday, this Thursday?
Yeah, this Thursday.
Yeah, and so then the next time, because I don't have the office hours on Friday, and then the next time would be the time the paper's turned in. So, maybe if I was all like writing and you saw me and you were running beside me and said, I have some questions on my paper, I'd say as long as you can keep up, I'll answer questions. Which is true. It's true. I've done that before. And I won't even go, faster because I'm old.
What's your amount time?
Now, slow. Very slow. Used to be fast back when I was young, back in the day.
5 minutes?
If it was a 5K, yeah, about 5. If it was a 10K, about 5:15. If it was a 10-miler, it'd be about 5:58 per mile. For marathon, about 6:15 or so. Well, the best was 2:45, way back in the day. Well, not Olympic.
Oh no.
Not Olympic class. Just slow.
You're a state champion somewhere.
Conference. Yeah, all conference twice, which did not make me famous. Because being a good runner doesn't pay very well.
It doesn't.
It is not. But anyways, that's an important lesson from modern philosophy. Philosophy doesn't pay very well. Running doesn't pay super well. We now turn to our last two dead guys. Dead guy David Hume, who is Scottish, and then we'll look at our other dead guy, Immanuel Kant. Both, super dead, but also super famous. Little background for Dave. He was born in 1711 in Edinburgh, Scotland. And his family was Calvinist, which is a branch of Christianity. One of the interesting views put forth by Calvinists is the idea of predestination, which is basically, your destiny is set. You're either heaven-bound or hell-bound, and there is literally nothing you can do. But you can have an idea about whether you are hell-bound or heaven-bound, because if you are doing well on earth, that's taken as a sign you're probably among the elect, probably destined for heaven. And if you're not doing well on earth, which is say you're in poverty, then you're probably hell-bound. Now, as we'll see, Hume, even though he was accused of being an atheist, never actually embraces atheism, for the reason that he regards atheism as requiring too much certainty. So he literally, in the very literal sense of the term, is agnostic. He believes there's no reason to believe, but no conclusive reason to believe that it's not true. He went to the school in Edinburgh, studied literature and philosophy, and his dream, his greatest dream, was achieving literary fame, becoming famous. The first book he wrote, while in France, was the book A Treatise of Human Nature, which was, in its time, total failure. But, kind of useless to Hume now, the book is still in print. A couple hundred years later, you can still go on Amazon and get it. So, failure then, kind of a success now. In 1745, he applied for a job at Edinburgh University and was refused because of his beliefs. In 1748, what he did was, kind of a smart thing. If you ever write a book and it's not successful, one option is to kind of give up. Another option, which is probably a better one, is to take that failure and kind of rebrand it and remarket it. To use an actual example, the movie Home Alone, which turned out to be a great success, initially was a great failure. What they did is they kind of repackaged it, released it around Christmas, and it became a classic movie. Likewise, what Hume did is he took his treatise, revised some parts of it, releasing it as an inquiry concerning human understanding, which was successful. He then took the third part and reworked it as an inquiry concerning the moral principles and morals, which was also successful. In 1752, he applied for a position at the University of Glasgow, also refused. In 1757, published his Natural History of Religion, which basically tried to give a psychological explanation of the religious impulse. And today, now in the 21st century, there are books doing the same thing, trying to explain why people have the religious beliefs they do. Finally, after he died, his book, Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, were published. Now, what he was probably best known for in his own time was his 6-volume History of England, written from 1754 to 1762. Very successful. Although now, if you go on like Amazon, you most likely find his philosophy books rather than the History of England. He died in 1776, possibly of cancer, or perhaps ulcerative colitis, and of course he's still dead today. Interestingly, despite his views on religion, he was nicknamed St. David and well-liked, and the street where he lived on now bears this name. He's buried, interestingly, boringly enough, in Scotland, and his tomb, apparently, people like to go there and litter it. And there was a campaign some years back to clean up, get all the trash and debris and broken bottles out of his tomb. It is kind of sad, but I guess he would have appreciated it because he liked a good drink, and so he probably found people drinking and throwing bottles into his tomb. So what was Dave up to before he died and stuff? Well, this is a familiar refrain. All the dead guys we looked at so far tend to have pretty similar motivations. like our good dead friend Descartes and others, and he believed that the foundations of philosophy and science were shaky, not very solid. And so what he wanted to do in response to that problem, believing that everything is being disputed and debated, there is no certainty, he thought the problem was this. And this is kind of an important contribution of his. He believed the problem was people were doing it wrong. How so? Well, typically what he thought people were doing wrong is that they did not focus on human beings. They didn't figure out human nature. And so his solution was this. He wanted to solve the problem and build a solid foundation by examining human nature, to figure out what people are like and then build from there. So in some ways kind of an approach somewhat similar to our good dead friend Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes claimed, you gotta look at what people really like, that's how you can build politics. But Hume thinks you need to figure out human nature for real, and then you can start answering questions. And then of course he died, still dead today. Now, like the other dead guys we looked at, he focused quite a bit on epistemology, theory of knowledge, how we know stuff, what we can know, etc., as well as metaphysics, which is about what kind of things there are. So basically, what you can know about stuff, and what are the things that you know about. What is there? Now, like our good dead friend John Locke and Berkeley, he falls into the model of using ideas. And like our previous dead guys, he breaks them down to particular categories. What is this? Firstly, there are perceptions. And these are the contents of the consciousness. So if you wanted to get some examples, just kind of look in your own mind. And there is an example of a perception. Now he breaks perceptions into two types: impressions and ideas. The impressions are the original experiences. To use a crappy analogy, think of like the mind as like a muddy area, like a clam flat. And so the impression would be, to use a crappy analogy, it's like if you step in the mud, you're leaving an impression. So the original ideas would be like that. They would be, that original experience. This includes the sensations we experience, as well as the contents of our psychological states. So all that mental stuff going on there. So that's the impressions. Those original experiences we have, to begin with a crappy analogy like someone making impression in the mud, and sensations about what's going on in our minds. So what about the ideas? Well, for him, ideas, to use his phrase, are less lively copies of impressions. And he thinks, being an empiricist, so putting him in our category, he's an empiricist. So whatever you know what's out there comes from out there through the senses. And so ideas copy our impressions. And what he puts forth a challenge. He says, the way to prove me wrong is to find an idea you got that doesn't come from an impression. Doesn't come through either the senses, that additional impression, or through some reflection on your inner psychological states. And Hume says, you can't do it. It can't be done. But one might say, what about the creative power of the mind? Well, Hume, again being an empiricist, believes that the mind cannot create something out of nothing. You can't get ideas from nothing. What then can the mind do? Well, this is the way he sees it. It's kind of like the model we saw with Locke. The mind is initially, empty, blank slate. To use the crappy analogy of the clam flat, it's like the clam flat, low tide. It's all smooth mud. And then the experiences we have are like, say, seagulls landing in the mud, leaving marks in the mud. So if the mind is like a thing of mud, the seagulls will be like the ideas. Or someone going to claim it, walking out in the mud, leaving the marks. Then he thinks that once we get stuff in there, then the mind, its creative power, is basically compounding, transposing, augmenting, or diminishing. And it's kind of an analogy I used before. It's kind of to use a crappy analogy, it's kind of like the Photoshop analogy. It's like you start off with a blank Photoshop screen. But all you can do is, if you have anything to work with, you've got to like get something like from your camera, to use the analogy. And so you take a picture, ends up in your, on your computer, and you get it in Photoshop. And once you get it in there, you can do all kinds of stuff with it. Modify it, shrink it, expand it, apply filters. And so for Hume, that's the creative power of the mind. Basically, again, using the crappy analogy, it's like we're like a camera in a way, getting pictures of the world. Then once it's in there, like with Photoshop or an audio editor, we can go in and edit that stuff. But initially we start off with no content. So you got to get the content. Now this is in contrast to our good dead friend Leibniz and our good dead friend Descartes, who believed the mind came pre-stocked with stuff. So to use the crappy analogy, if the mind is like a clam flat, they believe there's already stuff, impressions put in there, by the hand of God in a way, put his mark there. So there's already stuff in there. But Hume's view is nothing in there initially, or so he calls it. Now to prove this, he does raise a couple of good points. One is, well, I guess I can put it as a question. If someone were born blind, could they dream in color?
No.
No. I mean, if Hume's right, and you got to get stuff in here from out there, then someone who was born blind, would never have vision, would never have, dreams.
See color.
Yeah, never see color. And that seems to be true. Similarly, someone who is born deaf would have no ideas of sounds. And you might say if it was built in, you should expect to have that stuff, in there. Shouldn't have to get it from out there. And he seems to be right about that. Although someone like Leibniz would say, well, this stuff's in there, it's just it hasn't been kind of triggered. Like you wouldn't have any dreams about it because nothing's awake in that experience. Now, much like our good dead friend Locke and Newton, he buys into the notion, as you recall, except for Newton, space is like a box where you keep like your stuff. That basically space is where God keeps his stuff. And for Newton's view, the stuff in space are made up of these points, and of course they connect together to form objects. So in Newton's view, the water bottle, the bee, etc., and all of us made up all these physical, these points, these atoms, forming the more complex thing. And Hume likes that model as well. So for Hume, similar deal. The metaphorically, or by analogy, the stuff making up in your ideas in your mind are analogous to those physical atoms. So he buys into the same sort of atomism. Now, our good dead friend Newton, famously developed the laws that, some of the laws that involve the interaction between physical objects, laying out things like gravitation, etc. Now, Hume wants to do a similar thing. He wants to do for the mind, for the mental space, what Newton did for physical space. Try to find the laws that connect that going on there. So in many ways, Hume could be seen as doing what we now would call, say, psychology, trying to figure out how the mind works. One thing he comes up with is the notion of association. Namely, we associate ideas with other ideas. For example, to use one example would be, well, we associate, in fact we were saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. So we have an association of the ideas. We also have associations of we associate with injury, the idea of injury with the idea of pain. and not with like, you know, the taste of pineapples. Unless you were hurt by a pineapple, and then you might, the deadly pineapple. Now he comes up with the notion of three relations between ideas. And again, he's trying to sort out, in a way, he's kind of trying to do like the, well, not really the physics of the mind, I guess, but the psychics of the mind. And he says there are three relations between ideas. One is resemblance, that we tend to take ideas that are similar and associate that, you know, this is like this. And so we might have an idea of like house cat and a tiger, so we associate them. Secondly, there is contiguity, which is things that are close, proximal, in space or time. We tend to associate them. So for example, well, think of our ideas of, you know, like a map or locations. We associate things together. We associate, say, Tucker Hall with the library because they're close. We associate Monday and Tuesday because they're close in time. And thirdly, for Hume, which is something he's quite interested in, is cause and effect. In fact, he does like an entire focus on cause and effect. Now for Hume, and we'll see this in much more detail when we get to the particular part on that, he takes cause and effect basically to be, well, a relation among ideas, like this. And again, in a way, kind of a spoiler, because we'll talk about later, but the idea is kind of this. We see one thing happen, you know, I pick up the bottle, drink it, and then some of it goes away. And so I think, aha, the drinking causes it to go away. So we associate in our mind the idea of drinking with stuff going away, as opposed to, if you ever see like the reverse ones where they show someone like, you know, the stuff, you know, reverse drinking, in a way kind of gross. But, so we associate, you know, one idea with another, take it to be cause and effect. Or to use another example, we put, you know, the popcorn in the microwave, you know, beep, 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 and then pop it away. And so we associate the idea of the popcorn in the microwave with it going from corn to popcorn, and we'd say that's cause and effect. The microwave causes that to happen. So Hume thinks he's found like three associating principles: resemblance, contiguity, cause and effect. Or so he claims. Now, he also, again, comes up with the idea that really didn't really steal it from Leibniz, because other people have this view, but we saw this in Leibniz. Leibniz, and also Descartes and others, draw a distinction between what we would call, you know, for Leibniz we saw like the necessary truths and contingent truths, you know, matters of fact, you know, what we regard as, you know, truths of reason. And for Leibniz, Leibniz's view was, well, it's kind of similar to Hume. If you ask, you know, like Leibniz and Hume, hey, what about like truths of facts or matter of fact? They'd agree on those. Where they disagreed primarily, though, is about what Hume calls relations of ideas and what, you know, Leibniz called truths of reason. Here's the difference. Relations of ideas for Hume work the following way. These are, you know, truths about not things in the world, but about how our ideas of things, you know, relate or don't relate, connect or don't connect. To be a little clearer, you know, what would be some examples? Well, this would include geometry, algebra, arithmetic, and presumably, you know, things like logic. These are claims for him.
So relation or matters of fact would be the things that man has created to understand the world around him.
Oh, matters of fact would be, well, it'd be basically relation between, one way to put it is, they're, how to put it, they're about like what's out there. So, you know, although the reason why it's tough to put is because Hume, as we'll see later on, sort of embraces the view there's like nothing out there in a way. So it gets kind of weird, but kind of put intuitively, relations of ideas would be like about relations in our mind, like one idea connecting to another. And for example, like with, well, we'll take an example from geometry. Take like the example of a triangle. He thinks, if you say triangles are three-sided, that's talking about relations of ideas, because the idea of a triangle means three-sided. Or if we take like, if A is bigger than B, and B is bigger than C, A is bigger than C. And we know that because our ideas A, B, and C are related, those concepts. And a matter of fact would be, in our usual way of talking, would be something about the world out there. I mean, so to use my usual stupid example, if I draw a triangle, put my hand over it and I say, how many sides does it have? Everyone says, 3. I go, how did you know?
Because triangles have 2 sides.
Yeah, by definition. Now, if I ask you, like, how big the triangle is, well, you'd have to, look. Because it could be a very small triangle. I mean, you know it's smaller than my hand, but it could be a big one or a small one or what angle it's at. That'd be a matter of fact. So relations of ideas for Hume are kind of like Leibniz's truths of reason. If they're true, then they're necessarily true. Triangles always have 3 sides. And that is true whether you can find a triangle out in the world or not. Because it's truth of ideas. They don't depend on stuff being out there to be true. So a triangle having 3 sides, as he says, would be true whether we ever had triangles or no. To use another example, that a bachelor is an unmarried man would be true even if all people died. It's still by definition that would be the truth. And so it takes these to be necessary truths. Now, what separates him from our good dead friends like Descartes and Leibniz is he thinks the relations of ideas tell us nothing about what exists. In the sense that, if I'm sitting, and thinking, I would know, okay, triangles have 3 sides, squares have 4 sides, bachelors are unmarried. If A is bigger than B, and B is bigger than C, A is bigger than C. Those are all not about the world, but all about the ideas. And so sitting there, just thinking about it, I couldn't know about what's out in the world. I would know that if there's a triangle somewhere, say in New Jersey, it would have 3 sides. Or if there was a square, say in Alaska, it'd have 4 sides, but I wouldn't know if there was a square there. I would know that bachelors are unmarried, but I wouldn't know whether the person in the bar hitting on those ladies is a bachelor or not. I know if he's unmarried, he's a bachelor, but I wouldn't know if he was.
Matter of fact is like the actual reality of a situation.
Yeah. Yeah, so the matters of fact are, in a way kind of literally the facts of the situation. Now, with truths of, or relations of ideas, to deny one, just like our good dead friend Leibniz said, would involve a person in a contradiction. So if I say triangles are not 3-sided, I'd be saying the 3-sided figure is not 3-sided. Contradiction.
Which is false.
Yeah. Now, in the case of the matters of fact, their denial doesn't involve a contradiction. So if I say, there is a square in Alaska, or there's not a square in Alaska, we know that one of them's got to be true, but we don't know if denying it doesn't create a contradiction.
It's inductive reasoning kind of question.
Oh, in a way, yeah, because we'd have to look and,
There's definitely a square in Alaska somewhere.
maybe they just passed along, that squares are somehow offensive to people's fundamental beliefs, and all squares were destroyed. They spent
no longer have to be a square.
Yeah, exactly. It finally happened. Exactly. The ruling was it is not hip to be square anymore. All squares were destroyed. Now we think there's probably a square there. It seems unlikely they would all be gone, but not impossible. We'd actually have to go and check, because you might see flashing up on on the news, all squares in Alaska vanished. Experts baffled. Aliens suspected. Yeah, so matters of fact are things we actually have to go in and check. For example, and he gives a couple examples. Imagine you're the first human, and you're looking at, water. And you wonder, what will that do? Now Hume says by looking at it, you can't tell just by looking at it that it's fluid and that it's clear, that if you jumped in and just kind of hung out underwater for a while, that it would kill you. You would know you couldn't breathe it unless you tried. Similarly, like with fire. When you look, if you look at fire, you wouldn't know what it would do unless the classic thing is kids touching hot stoves. We can't, even if you're a genius kid sitting there contemplating, the relations of ideas, he would say, you know the fire burns you until you either touch it yourself or see someone touch it. So the big difference between our good dead friend, Hume and Leibniz, and between Hume and Descartes, is they would all believe in matters of fact. There are things that are true, that are facts about the world that don't express a contradiction. They can be true, but they don't have to be. Like, that there are squares in Alaska. We think we're pretty sure there are, but to be absolutely sure, we'd have to go and check. We know the squares have 4 sides, so we know if there are squares in Alaska, they have 4 sides. We don't have to look at that. But to know there are squares, we got to go check. Now, for Descartes and Leibniz, they believe that by pure reason, you can prove stuff exists. Primarily, God, the ontological argument, etc. And Hume says, no, there is this gap between the matters of fact and relations of ideas. And basically the difference is this. Relations of ideas for him are certain. They give you absolute certainty. If you got a square, it's got to have 4 sides. Can't be wrong. But they tell you nothing about what's out there. They're all, in a way, kind of conditional. Matters of fact tell you stuff about what's out there, but they're forever uncertain. Like the squares in Alaska. We don't know if they're still there or not. They could be gone. Or, like to take a less extreme example, if you have a car, you probably think your car is still there or not, like on fire.
Yeah.
But you don't know. Yeah, but you don't know. You're on, could be on fire. Now, this has a huge effect on Hume's, approach to stuff. So he believes the only possible certainty, in a way, is certainty that doesn't, well, I guess it does matter in a way, because these, math and stuff's important, but it tells us nothing about the world. And as we'll see, he ends up taking the view that we can never be sure what matters of fact, which ends up, as we'll see, leading him into skepticism. Now, before going on to more Hume stuff, anything about the Hume stuff so far that needs more stuff, more matters of fact, or ideas?
So Hume was an empiricist.
Yep.
He believes ideas come from perceptions and impressions, and that the mind is a blank slate. And the ideas in our minds are made up of smaller, indivisible ideas, like atoms.
Yeah, so we get the simple, kind of like with logs, where you get ideas come in, and then we can assemble and, assemble them and deassemble them and rearrange them.
Okay. He had 3 ideas of how we come to associations of ideas. Resemblance, continuity, cause and effect. And then, I never really, what was division about? What was that supposed to be? Like, do we...
Oh, there's 2, basically, the 2 types of, potential truths are relations of ideas, like squares that have 4 sides, and matters of fact. And Hume takes these to be, the division of those, the ideas. There's like how our ideas relate, which is all, inside our mind. Then the matters of fact is kind of like what's actual and out there. Yeah, so mathematics, for example, by itself, you can sit down and do math, and 2 plus 2 is, 4 is correct, but you don't know if you've got 4 things until you look. You can know if I take 2 cups and put them together, I get 4 cups, but you wouldn't know, do I actually have 4 cups of flour in my kitchen? You have to have to look or have looked. Now, one of the things that Hume was famous for was developing a theory of causation. And this involves both epistemology, how do you know about stuff, and metaphysics, namely what's out there in the world. Now, his goal was this. Scientists and philosophers during this time, and now, do raise the questions about, we throw around terms like power, or force, or energy, or causation. In fact, in physics, we've got, those notions, force. We have notions of like energy. And what he's trying to do is clarify those terms to see, and again, his view is, any idea you got in here has to come from out there. So he thinks basically, to use a crappy analogy, going back to my, clam flat or mud flat analogy, if there were tracks in the mud flat, something had to make those tracks. And so what you do is, if you wonder like where the idea comes from, you want to go and track it back to find out whatever walked through the flat. Because his view is, if there's any tracks in the flat, something had to go and put them there. You can't get them from nothing. And so we've got it in our, to use my crappy analogy, in the mud flat of the mind, we have, ideas of power, force, energy, causation. So if we track it back, what sort of beast do we find? Now, he begins this way. So what we get, of course, is, well, take his classic example. Imagine you're watching a game of billiards, which is actually different from pool. I looked it up one time, and I knew the difference at one point, but then I forgot because it didn't matter. But anyways, there's actually a difference between billiards and pool, and Wikipedia knows. Now, suppose you're watching a game of billiards, and what we think, we think that when someone is using the billiard cue, wherever they call it, the billiard stick, or the pool cue, that we think we're seeing cause and effect. The person, they rack up the thing and take their, the breaking shot, the balls go around, fall in the holes, etc. And we think, oh, we're seeing causation. The stick causes, the person causes the stick to move, stick causes the ball to move. There you go. And Hume says, well, let's go and look at that. To use a crap analogy, let's look at that film, see what's really in there. And Hume says that all we've got going on is impressions of the things happening. Let's go with the crappy film analogy. Suppose, you set up a camera, you film a game of pool, and you go and break it down frame by frame. Do you see causation? You say, there, causation. Frame 5, zoom in.
In the moment, where energy is expended.
No, but do you see the actual causation? Could you point to causation and say, there it is, right there, causation?
What causes the ball to move?
Well, even more than that, can you actually find the causation? Or what do you actually see? And if you look at the film, what do you see?
You see someone hit the ball and it moves.
Yeah, you see, imagine, to sort of help Hume with this point a bit, imagine you had two films. One was of an actual person playing pool. And we think, oh yeah, there's causal connection here. But imagine there's another one that's entirely computer generated. Now, the computer generation, does cause and effect really work there? Like in a video game.
Is actual energy expended?
Yeah, like in the clip. No, because in fact, one interesting thing about video games, and one of many things, is you actually have to make the physics work. You got to make it look like it's this, yeah, because otherwise you just have images, and working it properly. So one of the hard things in video games is making it all look real. And so if you have really good, if you have a video of just people really playing the pool, and a video of, a computer image, they would look the same. They're really good. And you look at them, you can say, zoom in, 5,000 times magnification, and it still look the same. And no matter how you look, you might be able to find Waldo in there. There's Waldo, hiding behind the table. But Hume's view is you never would actually see the causation. You just see one damn thing after another. So his claim is, again, if you don't see it, or hear it, etc., it's not there, because the only evidence you have that something is the senses. I mean, you can expand, you can use like microscopes and so forth, but his claim is no matter how you examine it, all you get is one thing followed by another. You never actually see causation.
Was Hume a physicist?
Oh, no, he's just, well, he tried to do some physics. But mostly he was like a philosopher, an ambassador, and apparently quite the ladies' man. Apparently there are times when he had to jump out of windows to avoid being shot by jealous husbands.
Nice.
He was a man of adventure.
Yeah, I feel like a physicist would probably disagree with him, because you can measure like energy expenditure.
You think you can, but all you'd have is basically, you know, take, for example, expose you, yes, but I mean, let's take a simple example like temperature. We think we're measuring temperature, but all we're doing is we're just seeing a thermometer. You stick the thermometer in and the thing goes up. Is it really measuring temperature?
Yeah, that's what they made it for.
Yeah, but how do you know that?
I mean, I'm assuming, but I'm sure like scientists who like study temperature and barometrics are like.
And how do they test it? How do you know the thermometer does what it does? Well, observation. They stick the thermometer in something that seems to be warm, and it goes up. But it's just one thing, you know, every time they've done it, it seems to do that. And humans say, sure. You see one thing followed by another, but that's all you ever see. You never actually see the causation.
So is he arguing that everything we measure might be correlation?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, that's you know, kind of a spoiler there, but yeah, it basically comes down to one thing followed by another. We never see the causal connection. We just see one thing happen followed by another thing. No matter how much we zoom in, we just see one thing followed by another. We never see the cause. And to use a really crappy analogy, imagine like you're a ghost hunter and you're trying to find, you know, you're filming to find the ghost. And then it'd be like, you know, getting the film shot where you actually see like the ghost's hand doing something. And so what we need would be an empirical observation of the causation. And Hume says you never see that. You see one thing followed by another. Now, what critics would say is what you said. You know, we don't see the causation, but we somehow know that.
I mean, like, we don't need to use stress sight to measure.
Yeah.
We can also use our sense of touch, that sort of thing. The other things that we can experience reality for to understand that this is probably causation.
Yeah, we have faith in our equations.
Yeah.
Faith in our math. But he would say, relation of ideas, you're just doing math. Could all, you know.
Yeah.
But that's, it actually made him, you know, that's kind of his famous thing, that all we do is we just experience one thing followed by another. We never see what he calls a necessary connection, that A must cause B. Now, of course, he doesn't just say that. Being a philosopher, he's going to like argue it out. This is what he claims. We can never get an idea of necessary connection from the mind working, you know, well, basically from inside our own mind. It's working on itself. Now, how so? Well, we do, or we might claim that we're conscious of an internal power that we have to move, you know, like ourselves,
Right.
or imagine new ideas. Because we think, oh, okay, I've got an idea of power. I'm thinking of stuff. I'm combining things. That gives me that's where my idea of causation and power and force comes from. Or we might claim that, you know, we're conscious that when I think about moving my arm, I can do it. But Hume says, you know, again, he's a philosopher, so he's not just going to say, you know, there's no connection, you know, done. He's going to argue like a bunch forth. So here's how he argues. First, he brings forth kind of, I think he's mowing, I thought he was mowing the sidewalk. Well, one year we had like a drought, we had no grass, and people, I guess they said their mowing schedules. They were mowing the dirt for real, just mowing dirt. Because I guess if you're paid by the hour,
Yeah.
hey, you're like, well, the schedule says mow the dirt. Mow the dirt. That's devotion to the job. So first thing is the mind-body problem, which is this. Well, as we saw with our good dead friend Descartes believed, you know, you get the mind, you get the body, and even Descartes, he recognized the problem. How does the mind, the ghost, control the shell? How does it drive it around? And that was super mysterious. Later in his life, Hume, you know, they discovered the pineal gland. Hume was like, yeah, that's it. And of course, critics said, come on, Well, Renee, that's still the same problem. How does the ghost push the gland? Now, so Hume's first argument is that, classic mind-body problem. We have no idea how the mind makes this happen. I mean, we have that connection. I think of it with my hand moves. No idea how that's happening. I mean, because metaphysically, again, if we believe the mind is an immaterial substance, the body's a material substance, we have no idea how they interact. So Hume says, this shows we have no idea of the power of cause and effect because we have no idea what's going on. Second problem, if we were conscious, aware of like a power, a force, we would be able to, he claims, be able to tell what parts or things in our body we can control voluntarily and which ones we cannot. And he claims that that's not the case. How so? Well, how do we know that our will can seemingly affect like our hand?
Because we think about moving our hand and do it.
Yeah, we think, we do it. But what about the will affecting the liver? Can you take conscious control of your liver?
No.
No, as far as I know, we can. But it doesn't feel any different. I mean, the only difference is, okay, it's moving. Then when I think about my liver, it's like nothing's happening. Or similar like with the eye. I mean, you can open and close your lids, but you can't consciously
Dilate your eyes.
yeah, make them go bigger or smaller. So we have control in some cases, not of others. Why? We only learn by experience. I can do this, I can't do that. What's the difference? I don't see any difference.
Would you want to have full control over all of your body?
Oh, that'd be awesome.
That'd be terrible.
No, that'd be great. I mean, I don't mean like all the time, because then you have to be like really busy.
Yeah.
But it could be pretty handy.
When?
Well, like cases where you gotta imagine you have to pretend you're dead. You just turn off your heart for a little while.
You would die.
No, you just turn a little while. Then you just restart it. There was some song. I remember I think it's like a $6 Million Man. There's actually one of the guys I think it was $6 Million Man. He had that full control. So for example, when he was he got shot and fell off a boat, and so he slowed down his heart so his breathing so he wouldn't die, and then he was rescued. So that'd be kind of handy. If you're in a world and there's no air, you just slow down your breathing.
You have to if we have full control over our body parts, we have to develop the skill to control, to do anything.
Oh yeah, they'd be.
Plus all of your bodily functions.
Oh yeah, people have full control. People who died a lot because they forget to breathe.
Forget to breathe.
Yeah, so it's kind of it's probably in a way you're right. It's probably pretty good that the heart is on auto function because
forget to digest their food.
Yeah, that could be a problem. But we don't know, at least according to Hume, we don't know the difference until we try. You don't, like I said, you don't remember okay, I do, tummy digest stuff. We just do that. Third, he basically claims the whole thing is unknown. Basically, what occurs, we think of moving our hand, and then we can, what if someone said, well, we got the sciencey stuff now. Back in Hume's day, they didn't have they didn't have knowledge of exactly how the nerves work and the muscles, etc. I mean, they had some. They had some knowledge of physiology, but Hume says even now, you break it down like the mitochondria, etc. We still don't know how that works. I mean, we basically have a story. The mitochondria do this. Then you'd say, well, do you actually see the cause and effect? Well, no. This happens and this happens. So Hume seems to be right. We see stuff happening, but we don't know exactly why.
But we know what happens.
We do know what happens, and Hume would never deny that. He'd say, stuff happens. Lots of stuff happens. Now, another argument he gives is this. He claims that when it comes to normal stuff, people, and this is our common sense view, we think we know why stuff happens. When it comes to normal things like things falling, plants growing, digesting food, we think that we're somehow understanding the causation, that we somehow perceive cause and effect. Now, Hume says that, what about extraordinary stuff? In his time, things like earthquakes, pestilence, what he calls prodigies, unusual things. And he says in those cases, we can't assign a cause and effect. You can go back in history and say before we knew we thought we knew, like how lightning worked, we couldn't explain that. And what we did, according to Hume, and according to people like Sigmund Freud, we assigned an invisible, intelligent causal principle, the gods, or God. But Hume says that, if we think about it, there's really no difference between the extraordinary and the normal. It's all equally mysterious. In the case of the normal, we just think we know. But when it comes down to it, our understanding of the normal and the extraordinary are no different. One is just familiar. It's like, to use a crappy analogy, it's kind of like friends and strangers. What's the difference? Well, the difference is you're familiar with one, you're not with the other. Or so it goes. So it comes down to, the point you brought up about Hume, it comes down to that there is no necessary connection. We can't, the reasoning behind it is this. If we observe, say, a single instance, let's take a stupid example. My own days in college. I had, my sister had gotten me a high school graduation present, a black and white 13-inch TV, which back then was high tech, because it was TV, black and white. And of course, back in those days, total analog. It has the dials, and you put an important skill was being able to adjust those rabbit ears and attach coat hangers and tinfoil to make it work. And occasionally, in the dorms, always a bad reception, as like a law. You never get to experience this if you didn't experience, today of all this fancy digital stuff. Yeah, you're lucky to have missed that. And 8-track tapes, lucky to miss those as well. And so occasionally it kind of fritz out. One time I snapped my fingers and the picture became, crystal clear. And a friend of mine was walking by, I was like, wow, how did you do that? And I was like, magic. Now, in that kind of case, would you say, if I said, magic, would you think that I had the power to make the TV do that? From one case. No, you look at it and say, finger snaps, TV clears up. Could be coincidence. Now, suppose then that I kept doing it over and over. Well, in that case, you might think differently. But in the first case, if you just saw it happen once, would you think that I had power over the TV?
No.
No, you just say, total coincidence. But keep that point in mind. Now, same with mind and body. Again, as he says, we never, we have that problem. We never observe that connection. One thing happens, nothing happens. No matter how we dig around in our mind, so to speak, we just see one thing followed by another. I think I'll move my hand moves. Hopefully. So,
It's ignoring it, because we don't just, we then find other things to support, our viewpoint.
oh, I do, yeah. And Hume would say we find more, we see more stuff.
More causations.
Yeah, so we would take and we can imagine going back to I don't have a microscope now, or MRI. So I'm think of my hand when my hand moves. But all I got is one thing followed by another. But if I, use an MRI to lay out, what's going on, in video, we'd say, oh, there's activity going on in the muscles and so forth. But then we'd say, well, all I see is, this activity followed by another activity. And no matter how much I dig down, I never find causation. I just find one thing followed by another, no matter how small it gets. Now we want to think there's something in there, some connection. But no matter how much we slice it, we never find it. We never find, going back to my crappy analogy, we're trying to find the ghost, that's doing the stuff in the house. We never find that, the ghostly hand, so to speak. We never see the causation. And of course, a good question is, what would it even look like? What are we even looking for? I mean, we might not even, we might not even know it if we saw it. So he claims this stuff, there's no connection. So we really have no notion. And again, his reasoning basically, I mean, recap of this, basically reasons like this. Okay, how does stuff get in your mind? Going back to the mud flat. Whatever is in here is going to come from out there through the senses. Going back to the mud flat analogy, if there are tracks in the mud flat, there must have been something that made those tracks. So let's track down that beast. So we take our, our ideas of like moving and stuff, and we examine them. What do we find? Does one thing follow by another? Do we find the beast called causation? And his claim is, we do not. We do not see that beast. All we see tracks, and we trace the tracks back, we find what made the tracks, but that is not the beast causation. That is one thing followed by another.
Why is it important to find causation?
Well, because that's a good question. Why care? Well, one reason is that, I mean, take, for example, let's take physics. I never actually took physics, which I should have. I took the easy path. And so I had to learn all my physics, the hard way by falling off roofs. If only I'd known about gravity. But, I mean, take like, formulas in physics. Like, what would be a formula in physics?
I'm sorry? What would be what?
A formula, it's a basic formula in physics.
E equals mc squared.
Yeah, I mean, take that one. That energy equals mass, times the constant speed of light, squared. Basically, you get a lot of energy and stuff. Now, we think our assumption is there's a necessary connection, that will always be true, and that there's somehow these things are connected. Or take, what's the formula for density?
Density?
Mass.
No idea.
Anybody ever take physics and mass?
Mass times volume equals density? Equals M times V.
Oh, it's divided, because density is a function. The higher the density, the higher density, the greater the mass.
You can look it up. I'll look it up.
Yeah.
That's up for volume.
We know there is a formula for that. We
Yeah.
just displayed I just displayed why I don't teach physics. I know there is a formula. I used to know it, but I don't.
That's over volume.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's over volume?
Yeah. V equals mv. It's like the DMV. No. That explains so much. Yeah, so we think that's always going to be the case. Or take like the ideal gas law, about volumes. I mean, basically we have this, the idea that as temperature increases, the volume of gas will increase. And we think we have an exact formula for that. You can calculate it. And we have all these formulas in engineering for calculating, the amount of stress that particular metals can take and so forth. We have all these equations. And we think there's a necessary connection. We think they always work. That this is always true. But the question is, what's the foundation for that? How do we know that's always true?
A lot of testing.
Yeah, lots of testing. And it happens over and over. Now, for Hume, this is how he says we get stuff like that. Now, the reason why it's important is because we want that to always be true. That way we can have faith in when we do engineering, when we do physics, when we do math, that we can always have faith in those equations. So if I'm an engineer, which I'm clearly not, I would want to be able to sit down and be able to trust all my formulas. Now, if I had a formula where, suppose I had a formula and they say, sometimes it works, sometimes it, doesn't, and everything goes to hell, you'd say, well, I'm probably not going to use that one because I can't trust it. So we want to be able to trust our formulas and equations and so forth so we know they're going to work. So basically that's what certainty is what is at stake. And we like to think we get it. So the question is an excellent question, how do we get those sorts of things? Well, Hume says this, here's how it's done. Experience. Just like you said, we see it happen, we do it a whole bunch. We take a bunch of objects and we put them to the test. Or we build like a whole bunch of bridges. We find that the formula has always worked. So what we do is this. If one event follows another, we think that we are justified that there's a connection. So, I mean, going back to the example of the billiard ball, what happens is we see, you know, the billiard stick, or whatever they call it, hits the ball and moves. It happens over and over again. And so we say hitting it makes it move. Well, let's go back to the example I brought up earlier, the one about the TV. So, you know, walking by the dorm room, TV gets fritzy, I snap my fingers, TV clears up immediately. First time, do you think there's a connection? Do you think I have powers? No. Suppose it goes on the fritz again, clears up. Do you think I have powers?
2 times maybe.
Yeah, third time, fixes again. Fourth time, fixes again.
You've got
Fifth
like the
time.
weirdest X-Men superpower ever.
Yeah, be kind of useless. Well, not totally useless, but not superpower.
Very convenient, actually.
It can be convenient.
Power you want to have.
I guess it'd be, if it's no power, that power, I guess that power is better than none.
Nothing.
Yeah, so after a while, at a certain point, we don't, you know, some people maybe 4 times, maybe 10, you know, 5, you'd say, well, the probability of it happening just by chance is too low. So I have the TV power. Now, but suppose this is part of like a study, and you know, suppose like it was being filmed, and you had like photos of each time that it happened, and they were like put out of order. Now, taking the photo the first time when you said, could be coincidence, you know, does that look any different than like the 100th time? If you look at what's happening, no, it looks exactly the same. Finger snaps, TV clears up. So what's the difference between the first time and the 100th time? What do you see that's different?
Nothing.
Yeah, nothing. The images, you know, if I took pictures of it and, you know, jumbled them together and laid them out and said, pick number 1 and pick number 100, you'd be like,
And it's just probably something you can't see.
yeah, but given Hume's view, if you can't experience it, you can't know. And it would seem to, I mean, people are empiricists would say, well then, you know, if something isn't empirically experienceable, you know, there may be things that we can't experience that are,
Yeah,
that are
like
weird.
see something.
Yeah, so you might say from a practical standpoint, I mean, one way to counter Hume is to say, well, maybe since we know now that our senses are limited. I mean, even then there are some things that people were aware, well, your dogs can hear things we can't hear. But they didn't have like the full, actually we don't have full knowledge. We know that there's like ultraviolet, you know,
Yeah.
infrared, gamma
We
radiation.
understand that they're like human beings cannot experience the full range of reality.
Yeah, so one thing we might say to Hume is maybe we just don't have we don't see it, not because it's not there, but because
We can't see it.
yeah, the same reason we can't see gamma rays.
Or cosmic radiation.
Yeah, or that type of stuff. Even though it's, you know,
There.
But he would say, well, that's a good point, but we think that there's cause and effect, because after a certain number of times where we say there's a causal connection, that causes that.
Right.
And he would say, well, what justifies that? What can we point to that makes the difference? And Hume's point is, again, if we took like 100 photos and put them out of order, they would you would see no difference. You wouldn't be able to tell. I mean, unless you looked at like what's on the TV, for example, and piece together that way. But you wouldn't have any way of telling. There'd be nothing different. But at round about, times 6 or 7 or 10 or whatever, we'd say, okay, we got a connection. If I do it regularly, we'd say there's actually a connection. But Hume says we don't actually see. So whatever idea we've got about causal connection, it's not something we see in the thing, because there's no difference between time 1 and time 100. It looks the same. The difference is, as he sees it, is habituation. We become conditioned, and so we come to psychologically expect that when that happens, the TV will straighten up. So after a certain number of times, we're psychologically conditioned to make that association. So for him, cause and effect is, to use this happened, way after Hume, but think of Pavlov's dog. The way the experiment was typically presented, what happened?
Pavlov rang a bell, and then dogs, and like did that for a month. And then he had them conditioned to salivate when he rang the bell, because they thought bell meant food.
Yeah, and so we're in a way, yeah, and so the dog associates the bell and the food. And, you know, essentially what Hume is doing is saying we're like that. You know, one thing happens followed by another. If it happens enough, we psychologically connect them. We think that this will be followed by that. But we never see the connection. So the dog expects food, but the bell doesn't make the food appear. The dog just connects them. They develop a psychological association. And so Hume's view is basically that's how it works. We just become psychologically conditioned to expect one thing to follow another. We never see the cause and effect. But in a way, he's right. We never do see the cause and effect. And that's, in a way, he's got it right. That's how we do science. We do it, you know, testability. If we could actually see cause and effect, you know, we could see, like, we could, like, you know, if we had, like, cause and effect vision, you know, like, if you had, like, gamma radiation vision, you can just see it. You do it, it happens once, yep, I see the cause effect, and now it's going to work every time.
We can somewhat see them just by graphing and getting like we can do enough representations of a thing happening that we can get like a picture of what it might look like.
We can guess. Yeah, if it happens enough, we think, you know, this will happen next. But of course, and this is a problem Hume brings out, suppose I do it like 20 times in a row. You expect it to happen the 21st time, but maybe it'll never happen again. So then what would you think?
That's weird. There's something that's changing in dad.
Yeah, you might think, you know, there's something's changed. Or you might think, well, I guess it was just coincidence. Yeah, because even though it's improbable, it's not impossible, you know, for it to happen like 20 times. And, you know, you'd say, I don't know what the odds would even be, but it's more than, obviously more than zero, so it could happen, you know, 20 times in a row. And we would tend to think, okay, like around 20, we'd expect it to happen again. And if it didn't, well, we'd say maybe something's changed, or maybe it was just pure coincidence. We have no way of, because what we think coincidence is, it doesn't happen, you know, regularly. Causation is it happens, you know, it always happens or happens like a bunch. But we never actually see the causation. I mean, it'd be really great to have, you know, causal vision. You could actually see like what, because it'd save a lot of trouble. You're a kid, you're like, my causal vision reveals touching the stove will burn my hand. Not going to touch that. Causal vision.
It's so terrifying though. Like,
I guess it would be kind of like if you saw how things really worked.
yeah.
You never, I mean, you go on a date, you're like, oh my God, my causal vision shows that if I marry Becky, it ends in disaster. Thank you, causal vision.
Yeah.
Then I guess, yeah, if you saw how everything worked, you'd probably be pretty horrified. You'd never stop screaming.
Yeah.
Maybe the people who do go like that, maybe they do have causal vision. They see how it really works, and they just can't stop screaming. Could be.
Just imagining some guy just like thinking about everything, just screaming at the point. Like, what's wrong with him? I have no idea.
He sees how, he knows how everything works.
Like, hey, who's gonna win this baseball game? Just screams.
Yeah, no, it'd be kind of really boring. You know, there'd be no surprises. So he brings forth two definitions of cause. Definition one. We experience that similar things are always conjoined with someone. One thing happens similar to another. And so basically what we say is, here's his first definition. An object followed by another, and all objects similar to the first are followed by objects similar to the second. So, if the first object had not been, the second would have never existed. Essentially, it's what our legal definition of cause, you know, sine qua non. Without this, you know, nothing but for. So in that case, we're basically saying, you know, this object is followed by that object. This happens, you know, happens over and over again. Second definition is this. The appearance of a cause always conveys by the mind by customary transition to the idea of effect, or more precisely, an object followed by another, and whose appearance always conveys the thought of that other. what's the difference? Well, one is this object followed by this object. The other is psychological. This, seeing that, is followed by my thought of that. Now, Hume says both definitions are flawed. Why? Because neither of them actually give us the connection. Because one is, this is followed by that. You know, A is followed by B. A is always followed by B. And the other is, A is followed by the idea of B, and A is always followed by the idea of B. Which is really not about causation at all. It just says one damn thing after another, or one damn idea after an object. So, he gives the example of vibration, like a string, like in a guitar. And if we say the vibration of the string causes a sound, we mean either that the vibration is followed by sound, or the appearance to the mind of the vibration of the string is followed by the anticipation of the idea of the sound. But he claims that's all we got. Either we think one thing is followed by another, or idea anticipates, you know, like I said, like we think it's going to happen next, but we never see the cause, or so he claims. Now, weirdly, or maybe non-weirdly, he thinks, and Hume does a lot of this type of stuff, where he'll like lay out all these problems and say, hey, you know, as a practical matter, here's, you know, what we got to deal with. Even though he thinks we have no idea of cause and effect, he does know how important custom is. How so? Well, he lays out the obvious practical stuff. Imagine if we didn't have the idea of custom. We didn't get habituated. Well, imagine what it'd be like if you couldn't do that psychologically. You imagine Pavlov's dog, and no matter how many times you ring the bell, it never gets conditioned. Or no matter how many times you see something, you basically say, well, I don't know what's going to happen next. Well, how would, you know, let's take a concrete example. Hot stove. Yeah, hot stove. Put your hand on it. How it burned. What happens if I do that again? Yeah, what if I do it again? Maybe it won't happen again. Maybe it won't happen again. And I've seen people do that in video games. Like something won't work, and they try it again, and like they try it again, it's like, it's not going to work. It didn't work the first time, or the 50th time, it's still not going to work.
That's the thing, like without the idea of causation, like what would the point of science?
Yeah, there'd be no science. But Hume thinks it's not a notion of causation, it's the notion of custom. That the habituation, what we're doing is basically relying on habituation. That well, in effect, I mean, you raise your point, in effect we use it like we would use the notion of causation. We like push your hand on the stove, it burns. You don't see the cause and effect, but once you do that, you make a connection. So you don't do that again. And without it, we wouldn't be able to, adjust our, means to our ends. Figure out like, okay, if I want to do this, what do I gotta do?
So the idea of causation is more important than the actual evidence of causation.
Well, we do end up in kind of a weird thing, because Hume says we have no idea of causation. All we've got is custom. We get habituated, one thing followed by another. So we have no justification whatsoever, but it basically says this is useful. If we didn't do that, we'd be basically screwed. Because we'd have to touch the stove every time. We'd never know to stop touching the stove. Because we think maybe next time it won't. Maybe it'll be awesome next time. It'd be like, to use a crappy analogy, it's kind of like surprise presents. You open it up, it may, or like, kind of a scratch-off game. Wasn't that great? Oh, I win. Next one, it'd be like that. You never know what's coming up next. Could be something awesome. Now, he also thinks, being an historian, he notes that the way we draw conclusions about distant times, the far past, or places, far away, he believes that, and he basically is laying out some history here, how to do history. We have to basically trace it back to some type of event. What he's basically saying is, looked at historically, in order to sort of validate or confirm our claims about history, there's got to be a connection, a chain from our current claim back to that original event, which is basically just, good history in a sense. And he has, for example, we might go with like, testimony from the text, but he thinks ultimately you have to be able to trace it back to an eyewitness. Otherwise, you're just guessing, which does seem true. And he does claim without something present to our senses now, all our reasoning would be, purely hypothetical, and we couldn't have any knowledge of stuff. So he ends up in kind of a weird sort of scenario, like we have no idea of cause and effect, but we need custom, because otherwise we'd all probably die. So in conclusion, what he claims is this: our belief in matters of fact all come from something present to our senses, or memory, and a customary conjunction. In other words, we reason like this. A appears, B appears. Happens over and over. So we expect when we get A, we get B. Why do we do this? Well, totally unjustified. But basically he ends up doing, to close, basically like psychology. He gives like what today we consider like an evolutionary answer. It's a natural impulse. Or today in modern terms, we evolved that way because if we didn't, we would have died. We never see the causation, but it just works. It's just as natural as when someone benefits you to appreciate or to favor that and to dislike those who harm you. And then of course he died, still live today. So next time, more Hume stuff. We'll go on to skepticism regarding the senses.